For the agenda for today, what we will look into, let's say a little bit, is the overview of changes. So what's really new in the new version, what's happening to the existing versions like Project Server 2013 and 2016 concerning availability and the end of support. What compatibility may I have in my environment, in my company, because an update to the server version does not necessarily always mean that you also have to update your clients. Yeah, it's a matter of effort, it's a matter of, let's say, time that you, let's say, win if you want so, because you can build on a transition period. So it doesn't have to be a big bang update of every single client, every single server, for example. We talk a little bit about system requirements, so you better understand what's needed on your side to build maybe a new solution. And of course, the core of this discussion will be the migration, and that's definitely where we spend most of the time today. That's the how, and maybe the why will be covered in the what's new in client and server. Definitely I'd like to show you what benefits you have from an updated version, except, let's say, the availability and then support by Microsoft. But there are also good reasons, let's say, from both sides why you should consider a migration into a newer environment. The next two topics are a little, maybe I would say, not really out of scope of this meeting and this webinar, but I'd like to show you some further developments that are quite new from the Microsoft side. They just have been announced a few days, 2 weeks ago. Some of them will be made available during the next, let's say, again, days and weeks in mostly, let's say, the online environment. But again, as we mostly talk about migration today, it's not only about migration to Project Server 2019, but possibly also for migration into Project Online, and we will find good reasons for it and against it during the next maybe 40-45 minutes when we look into it. Okay, let's start looking into the changes first. The RTM release to market, this is the final version of the product, is available since about 3 weeks. Yeah, so the product is ready to go. You can be, let's say, you can order it from your license partner, or your IT department may have their hands on it already. TPG has been working in a so-called technical adoption program, a TAP program, since April this year. So we have been using all the bits, let's say, that have been changing week over week, and the final version. And well, the result is finally what we see in the webinar today. So the official product launch will be end of November. That's what we can say. Then it will be publicly available over all the different channels that you have. Again, if you're a license solution partner that covers your licenses, you get it from them. Otherwise, you can probably just order from, let's say, any IT solution provider and software provider. So, not really new, but maybe for some of you, we have seen the survey at the very beginning where we've seen about 50% of you not using Project Server these days. Some of you have been or are using Project Server 2013 and maybe even earlier versions. First of all, the version 2016 and also 2019 of Project Server is a so-called feature in SharePoint. What does it mean technically and practically for you? In the old times, let's say from the beginning of Project Server till 2013, you had to do 2 separate installations. You had to install SharePoint first and make sure it's up and running, then install Project Server on top of it, which means additional effort from your IT people. Now, Project Server is out of the box, installed directly with SharePoint. When you get the server installed, you just have to switch it on. Switch it on means you have to have a license key and you switch on the feature, and then it's just there. Yeah, so there is no technical installation needed on top of it. End of mainstream support, of course, one of the reasons we talk about it today is not only the release of the final version that's available now, but also that the support for Project Server 2013 has already expired in April this year. And for Project Server 2016, we are still, let's say, on a relaxed, I would say, timeline. So we still have 3 years to go. And that's generally what Microsoft does with the products. You can have, let's say, 5 years of mainstream support, which is just covered by the product itself. If you, let's say, are under maintenance and you get, let's say, all the security updates all the time, extended support can be added, but this doesn't come for free. So this means an, let's say, a separate extended support agreement, usually with Microsoft or against the licensing service provider that makes sure that you get your licenses made available and the updates made available. Usually what's happening, just by the way, in the extended support range is you do not get any functional updates for sure. Yeah, the software stays as it is, but you still get security patches and updates. So you can still, let's say, be relaxed to run the software in your environment on premises with all the, let's say, ongoing patching against attacks and all the weaknesses that show up in software products naturally. So you can read all this, and we have it on every single slide that you will see. Where does it come from? You can read it all there, so we don't have all the details that I'm talking about on the slides. I think it's easier to digest, and you can all read, let's say, directly from the source, in this case from Microsoft. How can you combine these different, let's say, versions? For Project Server 2016, there is a number of versions on the client side. Project Professional 2016, 13, 16, and 19, and the Product Online desktop client. They all can connect to a Project Server 2016. For Project Server 2019, usually we get rid of the older versions, but happily not all of them. So Project Professional 2016, if you have this installed, for example, you can still keep it for the time being, connect to an updated Project Server. Of course, a few of the new functionalities will not be available as long as they depend on the client setup. So you will then get, let's say, all the benefits from the server-side extensions and new functionalities, but the users on the planning side might lack one feature or the other if they stay with Project Professional. On the other hand, you have time. Even if you update the server now, and again, that's what we'll discuss about in a few minutes, you can still take your time also with IT department and software development and all the testing in terms of compatibility with Office and everything else to then build a solid, let's say, rollout of Project Professional 2019. Or maybe you're even considering going away from the standard licensing that you have in place today, where you bought licenses and you bought software assurance and you had all this covered, let's say, for all every single user in the organization that might need the software. And maybe you consider now to go into a more flexible licensing scheme is offered by Project Online, which is part of the Microsoft Cloud. It's the desktop client, as we call it. So it is Project Professional 2019, if you want so, in a continuous development, new features being added, and the licensing there is a little more flexible in terms of, let's say, ramping up and, let's say, increasing and even decreasing the number of licenses over time, which is then called subscription. So you really subscribe to, let's say, the desktop client for the number of people you need, and if you need less, you pay for less. That's pretty interesting, I guess, also on this. So there's a variety of, let's say, setups and scenarios that you can choose from, which I think is a good, let's say, story to start with. So even if you update Project Server on-premise because you want to have all your data in your own environment, you don't want to and are not able to expose it maybe into a cloud solution, you can still benefit from the latest developments on the Project Online desktop client. Again, all this can be checked and read in more detail on the Microsoft pages, sources given here. Now to the system requirements, of course, for Project Server 2016 and 2019, there is a number of course, let's say, basic settings that you need to fulfill. On one hand, it's Windows Server 2016, Standard or Data Center, or Windows Server 2012 was still possible for Project Server 2016, and you needed to have a certain version of SQL Server version 2014. Now, of course, 3 years have gone. Project Server 2019 is out there, which means for the Windows Server, you can still use the 2016 or the really latest and greatest build of it, which is Windows Server 2019. What you do need to have, and there's no discussion, it's the 64-bit edition of SQL Server 2016. So this really means, let's say, maybe bigger upgrade in terms of infrastructure. So it's not enough if you think about, oh, I just replace my project server. No. With Project Server, as we learned some slides before, comes SharePoint Server 2019, and SharePoint Server 2019 requires SQL Server 2016. Too many numbers now, I agree. Maybe too many details, but again, you get all the slides anyway after the meeting. So considering a migration always requires really a setup of new infrastructure from all components. So that's basically, again, the basic story here. And maybe with all this covered so far, what do I need to build a new solution, or let's say a new version of Project Server? We can start looking into how do I get there from an existing version of Project Server, for example. So for the migration, first of all, no in-place migration possible. For the ones of you who have run through a number of migration, that's probably not new to you. This means you do need to install the next version, and you need to have physical copies of the databases. And this finally means if you're coming from a 2010 environment, and we still have a number of customers on premise running on 2010, you first of all need to do the migration to 2013, to 2016 then, and to 2019. We cover all this in more detail on the next few slides to really, let's say, explain what's going on there, but it really asks for a very, very stepwise migration from one version to the next one. There's nothing you can change about it. So that's maybe one of the reasons we at least add to this discussion the migration to Project Online. So this could definitely be something to consider compared to the stepwise migration steps that just first of all take time. Time means money, and it's not only the money of your IT people and maybe servers and solution providers like TPG is, and we run a lot of migrations for our customers these days. It also, let's say, takes some effort and some, let's say, financial contribution to build these different infrastructures, because running and, let's say, building 4 different versions of a single product, namely project server, is a certain IT effort that is just out there. And again, the migration is not done in a day. So you need to run these maybe, let's say, systems for a certain amount, several maybe weeks to months, to make sure that everything works. And only then will you switch off the old systems and go to 2019, for example. So for Project Online, what does it mean? Several options there, and again we cover them in some detail. You can manually migrate your product and resource data there, but that's not enough, right? Project Server has so much more. It's not only about the product and resources. So what about all the settings, all the enterprise fields, the lookup tables, the fields, the security model, the timesheet information, and so on? And that's where it can get very tricky to define what is the best way for a migration into Project Online. Tools are available, but not from Microsoft itself, which is, well, something to discuss. It is what it is. And we'll briefly touch on the different, let's say, flavors of third-party tools that are available to migrate there. But, and that's maybe the, let's say, light on the horizon, or the end of the tunnel maybe more, this could be the last migration. So if you go into Project Online now, you won't have to do any further migration again, because then all the software updates, all the automated, let's say, adding of new functionality and new versions is really done fully automatically in the Microsoft Cloud. There's nothing you need to do, and there's not so much you can do against it, if you don't like upgrades. So again, some information on the, let's say, upgrade process. Again, from the Microsoft side, just in a nutshell, described on this very simple page. And now we can go into some more discussion on what does it really take to run through, let's say, these different migration steps, for example. So where do we start? Let's say we start from Project Server 2010. Maybe I want to go to 2013, first step. So we need to install 2013 parallel. Then you, let's say, take the databases, copy them over to the new 2013 system, and let them migrate automatically by Microsoft. On-premise, all this is done, let's say, by automated scripts. So that could be the final version. Now let's consider, do we now go into Project Server 2019, or do we go into Project Online? For Project Online, we do have options. We could directly start from 2010, we can directly start from 2013, and we can directly start from 2016 to go into Project Online or to go into Project Server. So options are there, and it really maybe comes down to a business case calculation at the end of the day. If I'm starting on the very left-hand side at Project Server 2010, is it worth going all these different steps into Project Server 2019? Or would I better take a shortcut and go into Project Online, which has not only the functionality of Project Server 2019, but keeps a continuous development path and update path where you are not involved anymore, let's say, from a customer perspective in running through these migrations. Again, we talk about options today, about possibilities today, so you better get a better understanding of what it takes to get there. Finally, the decision needs to be made over time for systems out of, let's say, support, which is 2020, 2013, and wherever you come from, this could be the way. Project Server, stay on premise, or go into Project Online. And again, we cover now, let's say, as a very first step, the, let's say, technical migration coming from one of these older systems, and we stay on premise for the next few slides and understand what's happening there. So what needs to be migrated, first of all? Yeah, the entire system, one option, everything. Yeah, the entire database, perfectly okay. few things maybe are outside the entire database if it comes down to Microsoft Project Server. What about the information in the project sites? Yeah, this is SharePoint content, which usually lies in SharePoint content databases. It does not necessarily, and in the old version it wasn't in the existing project server data. It was separate databases, separate data, separate migration paths. For today, we really focus on the project server information, which goes from configuration over projects, resources, timesheet data, reports, and workflows. Project sites, again, for now, a little bit out of scope at the very first step. For the technical migration, we will discuss in detail shortly. However, is the entire system always good? And we have been upgrading our project server from what version? Let me think about 2003, 2007, 2010, 2013, 2016. We will go into Project Online as the next step because we get a little tired of migrations. And it's also always a very good opportunity for cleanup. Yeah, do I need these fields anymore that I maybe thought about and invented 5 years ago or 10 years ago? What about the reports? Can we somehow streamline them and maybe, let's say, agree on a reduced number of reports? We don't need these 15 different reports for different stakeholders because we have much more capabilities today for self-service in reporting for customers and stakeholders in my organization that then can tailor their own report built on a standard that I provide to them. And it's also an opportunity for the archiving of closed projects. Decision needs to be made here. Do I need the data of these projects still in my data warehouse for reporting? And there are solutions for that. Or do I just get rid of the old projects? I don't want to see them any longer. I don't need this information any longer, except maybe for the documents, for, let's say, documentation purpose. But there are also solutions for this one. So that's a necessary discussion as part of the migration, independent on which version you migrate to. Yeah? Independent if you go to an on-premise 2019 project server, or maybe you go into a Project Online environment. This is definitely part of, let's say, every single migration, and it's part of our migration model that we have as a standard, let's say, process model, how a migration should be run. Migration on-premise. Again, standard migration path as described by Microsoft, and TPG doesn't do it any different. Yeah, we just follow the path very consequently, and we have a number of checks. As I said before, it goes version by version. It requires a technical installation of all versions, which first of all means infrastructure. Yes, I do need to set up virtual machines or servers, for example, for coming from 2013 as an example. I need to install a 2016 environment. This can be a single box, don't worry. Yeah? The single box can have SQL Server, it can have SharePoint Server 2016 and Project Server 2016. Then you do the first step of migration. And migration not only means copying data, as we will see in the next step, it means checking data. It does mean functional checks. It means data quality checks. And then you build a 2019 environment with the system requirements we talked about before. Again, this could be now maybe more the final implementation, so maybe a 2-server scenario, maybe not right away load balancing and complex scenarios, but for production you will need it on top of it. So the whole, let's say, exclamation mark here tells me, yes, there is something to consider, and this might take some time to build these different infrastructures before I even start the real migration. Migration itself is done on a database level. You attach a copy of the database to the next product version. So a backup from 2013 is attached to 2016. Then you start a script. It's migrating the database to 2016. Can take, let's say, anything between hours and days, depending on the size of your existing installation. And then you do the same thing again for 2019. Yeah, that's definitely a must. To be sure you're on the right way and nothing went wrong in the first, second, or maybe third step of this long standard migration path, we recommend quality checks and completeness checks. So this definitely means, okay, based on some metrics that we usually generate from customer databases, we count the number of projects, we count the number of working, let's say, resources in the resource pool, we look at the number of assignments and the total number of, let's say, actual hours and planned hours for a given year or quarter, and we compare it before the migration and after the migration more or less automatically, and then we are sure that first of all the data has arrived in the new system. Then we do some functional check in the new system. Can I still open and create new projects? Can I still publish them? Does the time tracking work and so on? Do I have my old timesheet data? Can I still access them, for example? So this is definitely something that is needed in these different steps in between. It may cause additional effort for corrective actions, but on the other hand, it's an opportunity to see if you are on the right track, and then you would be ready to go into the next step, for example, 2016 to 2019. That's definitely how we run our migrations for customers. So we have all these, let's say, mandatory steps in between to be sure it works. Reports usually always require manual adjustment. Why? Because the data model changes from version to version. Data model, not so much that the field names are different, but Microsoft did a lot of restructuring in the database structure. In 2010, we had still 4 different databases that have finally, let's say, condensed into one database, but the schema, let's say, names in SQL changed a lot. So whenever you build Excel reports, for example, or reports in SSRS, SQL Server Reporting Service, or any other tool, you probably will have to touch them again. That's something I would not recommend in the intermediate steps. It doesn't make any sense as long as you are, let's say, fine on data quality. I would only recommend to do this on the very last step. So this is really a waste of time in between, but you will need to plan some effort for it, that the reports need to be adjusted. Look and feel can stay the same, but at least the data source side, the queries need to be updated, and then you can just refresh the report, and it should look as good as it did before based on the new and migrated version of Project Server, for example. This is the Microsoft way, standard migration. Absolutely okay, technically, and there's no other way that we could recommend. It works quite nicely. Every now and then things can also go wrong, as with every IT effort, but usually it's very easy to find these, let's say, issues in, let's say, test migration of the data, and that's maybe something till the end of, let's say, this meeting where we can make an interesting proposal to you. So if you're interested in test migrations, we definitely have an offer for you until the end of this webinar. Customer-specific considerations means each version adds or deprecates specific functionality. So for example, if you have been using the so-called resource plans in Project Server 2013, which allowed some level of top-down planning of resources at project level, at monthly and quarterly level, you could assign FTEs, and you didn't even need to have any detail for that in the project schedule. You could just start top-down, let's say, resource allocations for capacity management. This has been dropped in 2016. And there's a new functionality that has been added, which is called resource engagements. I'm going to show it very briefly at the end of this session, but it definitely means, okay, one functionality goes away, another functionality is being added, and you need to run a discussion on that before migration starts. I would definitely recommend it. Wherever you get the, let's say, intel from, what is new and what is old, we definitely support you on that, but I definitely recommend that we talk about these things beforehand to make very sure what, let's say, project managers maybe have to expect after the migration. Another good example, excuse me, is the agile planning functionality that comes with Project Online desktop client now. And again, this is an opportunity to add completely new planning mode, completely new functionality, but you cannot just throw it over the fence and make everybody happy with it. You definitely need to have a way to deploy it and to train it and make sure what would be the result on the user side. So, depending on all these considerations, yes, a technical migration, take everything and cross your fingers and wait for the migration to run. Perfectly okay for mostly standardized environments. But it could also lead to a stepwise migration approach, some scripting of configuration data, of master data, and maybe selected projects. So again, message here, you do have a choice. How you come from one version to the next one, but it also means that finally a discussion needs to run much more in advance before a technical environment has been set up, and you really start thinking and discussing about, okay, how do we bring it into the next version right away? First of all is the what, and then the how. For Project Online, okay, this doesn't look good down there, sorry for that. Any version from 2010 onwards can be migrated to Project Online, but there is no standard migration by Microsoft to Project Online. Yeah, it's a pity, but it is what it is. So of course, there are always solutions on the market, and this means, yeah, there are partner solutions for migration. Let's say, speak about a few of them in a second, something to consider. On the other hand, as a distinction, again, as I pointed out before, between migration of PPM data, product server data, if you're on-premise today, and SharePoint content, SharePoint sites like risks and issues and documents. And again, then at this point, it makes sense to also talk about hybrid approaches. Yeah, we do have customers that, for example, use some of the data from project management and brought it into the Microsoft Cloud for Project Online, but they still stay with SharePoint and documents on-premise, for example, and can happily run, let's say, a hybrid environment as well. So again, options and options, but that's definitely what we'd like to, let's say, discuss today and make it a little clearer at the end of this session what would be a good way for you. The best way, as always, depends on the required content in the new system. And as I said before, most questions have been asked on the slides before already. The advantage, this is the last migration. Now I say it is, it not only could be, because the updates and Project Online are automatically installed for both the server and the client. It's called click to run technology. So the Microsoft Cloud then takes care on a regular basis that you receive the latest, let's say, version of a client software installed to your machine, and then you can connect, let's say, either to a project server on premise or to Project Online. And of course, you don't have to take care about these technical installations anymore. You have a limited control on the update dates. Yeah, so there is a cycle, there's a release cycle dictated, I would say, by Microsoft. You can, I would say, slow down it for a given number of months, and you can say, no, for the next 2, 3, 4 months, I do not want to have these updates, but at one point in time, they will just be enforced. The reason you can, let's say, slow them down and, let's say, delay them a little bit is the possibility to pre-evaluate these changes in a test or QA environment and prepare for the rollout from an organizational point of view, from a training point of view. And then at one point on your productive system, the update will just hit and, let's say, bring it to the latest and greatest version, whatever you agreed on. But again, you cannot prevent it forever, yeah, which is part of a cloud solution anyway. So finally, what exactly does it take now, for example, to go into Project Online? What third-party tools do we have? And we name them very briefly here. Fluent Books, maybe some of you heard about it already. You can read and write multiple versions of Microsoft Project Server and Project Online. You have a documentation of settings and configuration. You can compare and update changes while you run these different, let's say, read from one system and write to the other system, for example. It's a native data format for storage, so you cannot change data in between, and the licensing depends on the number of PWA sites maybe you want to create and that you want to migrate to. So you can not only migrate data between project on-premise, Project Server 2013, for example, going into Project Online, you can also migrate data between different so-called Project Web App sites, Project Online sites, maybe from a test site to a, let's say, QA site to a production site, and it's quite handy tool to do all that. We have an internal tool that we use for, let's say, our consultants to read and write custom fields and lookup tables. We also use it to create the documentation in XML and Excel. Data can be changed between the migration steps because we find every now and then that we read from an existing 2013 system. The customer wants to have changes in between, and only then we bring it maybe into, let's say, a 2019 system or into, let's say, a Project Online system. Long story short, it does not have all the wills and bezels from Fluent Books, so that has a partly functionality for, let's say, updating most of the configuration settings in Project Server 2019 or in Project Online. There are other systems on the market, more coming from SharePoint product companies like Metalogix and AvePoint. Some of them are very good, let's say, to migrate SharePoint data, for example, all the documents or just a number of documents with metadata and versions, SharePoint lists, workflows with all the intermediate states, for example, and the approval information. And again, Metalogix is, let's say, built on that, or let's say has a lot of functionality in working on SharePoint data. On the AvePoint side, it's possible to save and restore, again, PWA content, also between sites and tenants. So you have a choice there, and it maybe really depends on the scope of the migration that you have in mind. Yeah, as we pointed out the last maybe 15-20 minutes, some things to consider. What would I like to have migrated? From which version do I go to which new version? Will I stay on premise? Will I go into online? And maybe this all drives also the decision on what would be the best tool support, besides the standard, of course, technical migration that Microsoft offers. Good, then let's continue and really look into why would I probably migrate, yeah, except of course being up to date and being under support, let's say from the product side. It could be just interesting to see in what's new in the server. First of all is a functionality called resource engagement, which has two flavors, I would say. I will show that anyway live in let's say a few seconds, and so I definitely want to make sure that this is something that has been added to Project Server 2016. It has been available in Project Online for the last few years already. Yeah, let's say a functionality that you can use right away from 2016 onwards, and of course it's in 2019 as well. So what is Project Server 2019 finally? It's really a copy, more or less, yeah, as always, of Project Online as of May this year. So it's a pretty up-to-date version of what you see in the Microsoft Cloud environment. Of course, it has been stripped down every now and then in terms of maybe connecting to other, let's say, cloud services which are not available on for the, let's say, on-premise version, but it basically has all the functionality from May this year inside. Yeah? And the nice piece about this is, and that's definitely something to consider, it's definitely not a new software release that first of all needs to be tested and stabilized. Yeah? Project Online has been on the market for 5 years now. It has followed a continuous development path. Every single, let's say every 2 weeks it gets updated, gets new functionality. So it's really under continuous development. So kind of creating a snapshot from that from May this year gives you a very, very sophisticated and very stable product that really has been tested by 100,000 of users over many years. So it's nothing, let's say, I remember the old times, yeah, when a new version of Project Server, and I don't want to go back as 2007, which was a nightmare, was on the market, and it took half a year to get it stable. Yeah, this is not the case anymore. So going into 2019 right away, I would have a very clear recommendation. Perfectly okay if it fits to, let's say, being on premise and you need to get away from 2010 or 2013, make the move to 2019 with the intermediate step of 16, for example, and then you're good for the next 5 years in terms of support and everything else. So what's maybe interesting for you, which has been added since then, since Project Server 2016, a team can be added from multiple employees. What does this mean? Yeah, the ones who have been using Project Server maybe for some time, and the resource side, it's possible to declare teams, yeah, teams of people. You can plan these teams, you can assign them to tasks in a project, and so far, whenever someone picked this task because he is a team member of this team, the team resource was deleted and the person took over the entire effort, which is maybe the reason for a team, but not necessarily. So this has been changed. Now multiple people can self-assign them to these tasks where the team initially has been planned against, and they just share the workload, which makes more sense in the team approach finally. And the project manager who initially only assigned the team can then see a growing list of named resources of individual people that contribute to this individual task and maybe the deliverables behind them. So very nice. It really makes more sense now to think about team resources again. Yeah, so with the old one replaces everything didn't make a whole lot of sense in my point of view. Now there's really some more benefit in having these team resources available in Project Server and Project Online. Very nice on the reporting side, something that maybe some people missed a lot that come from, let's say, Project Server on premise. Yeah, for some very old versions of Project Server, you could define what the granularity of your reporting data should be. And now you have it directly built into Project Server 2019. So you'd configure and tell the system, would I like to have my time phase data, plan cost, actual cost, baseline cost, all the time phase data on a daily, monthly, or yearly level, which has a huge impact on performance on reporting side. Just imagine going from days to months. This cuts down the volume, let's say, to 1/30th of the data that you need to, let's say, download into a report. And if I look into our customer base, I don't know really any customer who reads reporting on a daily base. For most of them, it's monthly base anyway. So yes, finally, Microsoft got the message here, which is very good. I think it's one of the bigger requests that has come from user voice, where you can all submit your wishes against the product. And time phase data now can really be stripped down. Of course, the report don't need to be changed, yeah, which is quite nice. They still pull the date field, but they would only see, for example, the first of the month and not the first from the to the 31st of the month. And finally, the reports roll up data at the monthly level anyway. So good development, I would say, not so bad. You have more options for notifications when you push out notifications, when you want to pull notifications, so it goes both directions. This definitely has been extended. You have a configurable and unique project ID at project creation. This means every single project in project server gets a single speaking number. Yeah, so you have a prefix, you have a number that counts up, and you have a suffix at the end of it. You can freely define these, let's say, IDs, and let's say assign them to different so-called enterprise project types. So you say, if I create an infrastructure project, I want to have an INF dash something dash something. If I create a software development project, it's mostly maybe DEF dash something, that 2018, for example. So a very nice way to create unique and speaking ideas to projects while you create them in project server. So definitely makes a lot of sense here. Again, a very nice opportunity to add that. The number of user-defined fields and lookup tables has been enhanced. So it's up to 450 user-defined fields and lookup tables. Don't even try to get there. It doesn't make any sense. No one can understand what's going on. But yes, there is really no technical limit, even if that literally is a technical, but I think no customer will hit this anytime soon in terms of running out of fields that you still need to understand, and all they need to be maintained. Yeah, someone has to type in information for them anyway. The resource engagements, as I pointed out, does have its own API, so you can read and write the data into this one. And why is this specifically interesting? Because it offers me a possibility for a top-down portfolio level planning and demand of resources. Yeah, it's really more capacity planning at a very high level. I show it to you briefly in a minute or so. And the data into this can come from different sources. That's the reason we pointed out here. It doesn't not necessarily have to come from a user, either in Microsoft project or in project, let's say, server. You can definitely feed some data from external systems into it. Maybe you do have another solution that, let's say, has long-term planning data. Maybe an SAP, PPM, maybe it's another top-down and request planning tool that you have in place. And this could definitely feed into this one to see what would be the impact of all these demands and wishes out there in terms of feasibility on the resource side. Excuse me. Again, information on this can be found on the Microsoft pages. So what's new on the client side? On Product Professional, again, could feed into the resource engagements. We did have multiple timelines. Product Professional adds some more on that. Maybe it's really minor updates. Yeah, to be honest, nothing, let's say, groundbreaking here. So we do have a column for the related summary task name. So you can just add a column into your view and say, show me the summary name of this task. Could be helpful for reporting, I guess, because you don't have to find out on your own what's my summary task. You directly have it available in the client. You can select the predecessor and successor from a value list, which I think is very, very helpful, to be honest, because if you look at the predecessor and successor column in the past, you could type in numbers and some cryptic abbreviations. Now you can pull them. I show it to you later when we go into the demo. You have percent completion in the timeline. Again, it's really minor adjustments. You still have, of course, multiple timelines, and you can add the percent completion information into the timeline, which I think makes a lot of sense. Yeah, why would you look into a timeline if you don't see where you are, for example? And finally, we have different labels for the timeline. So you could label them top-down milestones, reporting milestones, phases, deliverables, and have, for example, 4 different timelines set up in a given schedule that all show different pieces of your entire project schedule at a nice roll-up of a timeline. Yeah, just as a starting point. Project Online Desktop Client, I said before, also possible to connect this one to Product Professional 2016 and 19. This adds even more new functionality besides, let's say, the flexible subscription and licensing model. So same as 2019, it adds some agile functions into the planning, and that's also something I'd like to show better hands-on before I explain it on PowerPoint. Last but not least, but this again then only works if you have a Microsoft Office 365 subscription at all. Yeah, you can connect your schedules, for example, running in Project Server on-premise to Microsoft Planner for the detailed task and to-do management. Yeah, so you don't have to plan every single piece of detail in your schedule, all the different subtasks and the to-dos, because you want to keep your schedule lean and clean. And you then, let's say, connect it to a Microsoft Planner where all the team members would then work on their individual small task and work items. So let's briefly look into two of them. We have a demo on the resource engagement sides, and we do have a demo on the agile functions. And let me briefly go into the right environment for this one. So first of all, this is an on-premise installation of Project Server 2019. Yeah, just a look and feel, some new functionality in there. We don't have too much data. Just as a comparison, it could look more or less exactly the same in Project Online. Yeah, it's the same ribbons, it's the same functionality, it's the same basic, let's say, setup that you have in there. And just to give an idea what a resource engagement means in terms of functionality, in case you haven't seen it, let me briefly go in here and pick a work resource and say, okay, where is my, sorry for that, work resource, for example. So first of all, I could say, yeah, maybe I'd like to see which of them are generic and non-generic. And I could start by assigning either people or individual roles to a given project. Now I take an analyst and say, I need analysts, yeah, for a specific project that sits out there. And for this, I can directly go into the so-called resource requests, which definitely shows me, okay, what information would I like to add to the analyst in terms of a project. There's nothing in there, which is perfectly okay. I'm going into the engagements here, and I'm going to add an engagement. This means I can say for the analyst as a group of people, and I only picked analysts so far. I pick a project from my project server, maybe whatever it might be, very simple project schedule. I don't even need to understand the schedule. I don't need even tasks in there. And I can say top-down resource need. Yeah, and this now gives me some opportunities here. I can say, yeah, I think we might need them from beginning of next year onwards, let's say from January 1st, and we need them maybe till the end of, let's say, March. Okay, perfectly okay. And I want to plan, let's say, this person by a certain work level. Let's say I want to assign, let's say, 200 hours to them, which is perfectly okay. So this means even without going into the schedule and without going into, okay, where is it? Okay, here we go. Even without going into all the details, I can definitely go in here. I say, okay, let me make sure I see this on a monthly level. Perfectly okay. Let's go into the desired time frame. And now I could say maybe in January it's 100 hours I need from them, maybe in 50 hours here and 150 hours back here. Yeah, so I can, let's say, drive two different levels of information. I can look into the request against the resource. I can make a commitment and say that's much what we need. And this shows up in the resource load, for example, without the need to go into the schedule and assign resources right away. So it's part of the resource load that we will see in the analysis side, and it allows for top-down assignment of resources to projects. Period. Yeah, not more, not less. That's basically one thing I'd like to show about resource engagements. Now let's look at the second live demo part I'd like to cover, which is the possibility to do some agile planning in the project clients. You see, when you start the Microsoft Project Online client, you have the possibility to create a waterfall project. We all know that. Yeah, we have done it for many years probably. And now you can create a so-called sprints project. And the sprint project really means I first of all collect my task. So I need to have something like whatever, collect requirements. Then I do something like analysis of these. I do, let's say, a concept phase, maybe. Next step could be, and that's probably enough to do, let's say, a mock-up. And then I could say, okay, based on this, I'd like to assign these different, let's say, to-dos from my backlog into the sprints. First of all, the requirements need to be collected. Maybe I'm still okay for the analysis, but definitely the concept is done in sprint 2 and the mockup is done in sprint 3. And I have a number of options to work on. First of all, I can say, when are these sprints supposed to run? Would I more work, let's say, on a 2-week, let's say, schedule, on a 3-week schedule? And you see that the dates are automatically adjusting here. I could say there's a standard duration of 3 weeks every single time. I can have more sprints in here. So this would give me the opportunity to really do something like a more agile planning. I collect my, let's say, stories first and my backlog items. I redistribute them over sprints. And I can switch the sprint view now maybe to a so-called task board, which is not really a full-blown Kanban board. But yes, at one point it is, yeah, because now I can say, now that we did the sprint planning, I go into the task board. I maybe look into the requirements in here and maybe the sequence, which has been, let's say, created from the sprint planning, by the way. And now I could say, yeah, maybe I even like to have a mock-up a little earlier. Yeah, so I can do a prioritization of these different tasks. And then I go in here and say, okay, maybe the let's say collection of requirements is something that's in progress already, the analysis the next one, and everything that should be in progress counts with 25% in our organization, and something that's for next up does not even count. Or maybe I assign it 5% to see, okay, something's definitely coming here. Yeah, so a certain, let's say, level of adoption, not only on the, let's say, task board, the Kanban, let's say, view onto it, but also on the planning view based by, let's say, sprints, for example. Several options here to work on. This is part of the client functionality that comes with Project Online Desktop Client, which can connect to Project Server 2019 finally. Sorry for the very short, let's say, presentation, but I think that's all we like to cover today, that it might make sense to think about into some of these functionalities in more detail, and we're happy to, let's say, give you more details on that. Now, 3 pages on Outlook, what's going to come on Project and Project Server. All of these changes will be applied to Project Online only. Yeah, that's the message we have for now. Over time, some of them might find their way into 2019, but that's something we do not know today. There's a new functionality called Project Home. This means I, as a user, log into my environment. In this environment, I have, let's say, access to all the different projects I've been working on, independent on which, let's say, project site they have been on. I have favorites for projects I'd like to work on all the time. I can create new projects from here. So a very nice, a leaner user interface compared to going into a project center and find my way around it. Maybe this helps one user or the other to, let's say, easier navigate, let's say, through Project Online and access either my used projects from the past or also create new projects top-down based on templates I find in this new create here. Sorry for the German screenshot. Of course, this is available in English as well. What's also going to come, will be released actually next week, is a functionality called Project Roadmap. And Project Roadmap means you can do a top-down planning of projects. So I can just create a row item down here. Yeah? I can click on Add Row Item, create a new row, plan something for January to March next year, for example, maybe assign a few milestones on top of it without going into any scheduling tool. I don't need to build a schedule in Project Online. I don't need to build a schedule in Microsoft Project, the desktop client. I just start top-down planning, and then when I'm ready to start the detailed planning on the scheduling side, I'm connecting these phases or these projects to the detailed schedule in the system at the back end. Yeah, and then it will be updated directly from the detailed planning. And the source for these different roadmap items in here can be a Project Online system, an Azure DevOps system, so Visual Studio Team Services as was called in the past. It will be possible to connect the Jira schedule to it. So the whole story here is a holistic view on your roadmap of things to come that can be started top-down and later can be connected to details in a number of systems out there. Yeah, I think quite interesting functionality to come, which will, but for the time being, only be available in Project Online. Last but not least, as I said before, some top-down planning. It can be linked to Project Online dates later on, different sources to come. It's not built on SharePoint. It uses O365 Group for access and security. As you can see from the screenshot before, this already looks a little different than SharePoint. And yes, the good story here is, I think it's a good story, is we do not depend on SharePoint anymore in terms of building a new and fresher user interface, yeah, from the product point of view. And this is something Microsoft did a lot. It says, yes, everything we build from now on will not be initially based on SharePoint. SharePoint has modern libraries, modern functionalities already. It's more like Planner and Teams, like other, let's say, cloud services from Microsoft. So the modern UI could look something like this. Yeah, that's a sneak preview of what's going to come. Looking into an individual project, you can look at the board of the project. You can look at the Gantt chart up here. You can look at the team working on that. So a very different maybe approach, more graphically, more snappy maybe going, let's say, into the user interface. That's how the Gantt chart view could look like, for example. And again, this is something to come during the next weeks and months for, let's say, everything Microsoft develops against new offerings in the cloud. New offerings in the cloud, last slide on this one, and that's very, very new. It will be a new service developed from scratch. We don't know too much about it. Actually, at this point in time, very little is known. There will be a transition period from Project Online into the new project service. At this point in time, we are not sure how it's going to look like. It's a new scheduling engine. It has a universal resource scheduling engine that comes, let's say, from Dynamics. Many new things. Co-authoring, very interesting, I think, for big projects, of course, with all the pros and cons. Yeah, multiple users make changes to a schedule. Sounds appealing. Well, I'm not so sure about. And a new technical backend. So this really in a nutshell, just to round up the discussion for today, to make it maybe a little easier for you to make a decision to either go into this or that direction in terms of getting away from your existing 2010, 2013 project server and then make a right decision to go into the new world, either on Project Online or on Project Server. Again, some more details on our blog where you can read up some of the details behind that. Licensing wise, very last slide, existing licenses for online can be used for the new services and the new features. With all that, we finally reached the end of the presentation today, and I hand back to Achim.